Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. Today in this show, or actually, let's start over again. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath. Today is Wednesday. I am the founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and this podcast. And on this show, I chat with experts in all facets of food and beverage about food and beverage, from chefs to doctors to farmers to advocates to eaters, so that we can all sit down at a table and share a meal together, feeling included and feeling wanted and having something delicious that meets our dietary needs, no matter if we're celiac, have food allergies, vegan, follow a kosher diet or halal diet. So I just want us all to, embrace each other for the dietary choices that we make and or the necessities that we have because of having medical conditions. And speaking of medical conditions, this month is Food Allergy Awareness Month and Celiac Disease Awareness Month, two medical conditions that require people to eat a specific way so they don't harm themselves or potentially die. And today's guest, I'm excited to have on the show, is Mike Frolichstein. He created the Celiac Project in 2014 while making a documentary of the same name. His vision was to use his filmmaking background to help raise awareness about celiac disease after he suffered many years and finally being diagnosed at the age of 40. The mission of the Celiac Project, the film and the podcast, is to help people who are coping with the life-changing diagnosis of having to live gluten-free to feel empowered moving forward and to live a safe and fulfilling life. His efforts to advance the conversations about what we can do individually and as a society to support the gluten intolerant community has been an inspiring journey that he is grateful for every day. And I am too. Thank you, Mike. Or welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Tracy. A pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. And apparently Wednesday's screwing me up today, but that's okay. I watched the documentary the last week, and it's, for everyone that wants to watch it, it's on Netflix. No, it's on Amazon Prime, and it's an hour, and it's really, I know a lot about celiac, but I don't know as much as you do. But it was really eye-opening for me to see your story and the story of your family. So can you tell people about your journey?
Yes, I appreciate that. So like you were alluding to, I was sick all my life. I was sick from the time I was about 13. And I was diagnosed with celiac at 40.
Wow.
Just, having a doctor that took the time to sit down and listen to my story. And, I'd never had, Tracy, a meeting with a doctor like this. I moved from Los Angeles back to the Chicago area where I live and where I grew up, and needed to change doctors, and knew that there were things wrong with me, and sort of was in this spot in my life where I thought, okay, doctors tell me that I'm anxious and that I have all these problems based on anxiety. And this doctor sat down and just listened to my story, my life story. And I said I had, migraines, and I had actually epileptic seizures at one point.
Wow.
And digestive issues, some of which don't come up as much in the film because I had an hour to deal with. And you kind of have to, tell a sort of a well-honed story. So I didn't want to get things too confused, but I had many, many different symptoms. She listened to me, took them down unbeknownst to me. One of the tests she ran was for celiac disease, and I was off the charts for celiac. And this sort of led me on this journey of, the first thing that sort of hit me was the injustice of having to, be sick from the time that I was in my teens to now, and finding out that a simple blood test was the beginning to getting some answers. And my training, I went to film school and have been a film and television editor and filmmaker all my life. And I realized, I think within about a month of my diagnosis, that I really wanted to do something to communicate, not necessarily my story. That wasn't actually my goal at all. I actually reached out to other people in my area, just starting in the Chicago area, and I found people in my own backyard. You know, just when you're sort of testing out, do I have enough to make a documentary about this? And I heard really dramatic stories, like I say, in my backyard, like in my own town, that were much more dramatic, I thought, than my own story. And so I thought, wow, other people have experienced some of what I've experienced, and I set out to tell kind of, you know, some of the stories of celiac disease. You know, it unintentionally became me and my family became part of the focus, or a large part of the focus, because as I started making the film, my daughter got diagnosed at 3.5, and then my nephew, who was mostly asymptomatic, got diagnosed at 17. And it really kind of, you know, as a filmmaker, you have to follow where the story is bringing you. And it was really surprising that my nephew Sam was diagnosed. So I kind of reluctantly, my wife, who's a co-producer, and I have another co-producer, Jason, and they were like, well, you have to get in front of the camera, or, you know, and tell your story. And it was really painful, but also cathartic. And, you know, it made me, I think it's easier for me now to listen to my voice, as I have had a podcast for 5 years, because I've seen myself, you know, broken down in tears and had to edit that all together, which is kind of, you know, my nightmare as a filmmaker. But that's, I guess, in a nutshell, the story of my diagnosis, and then why I decided to make a documentary.
Well, I thought it was remarkable, and you know, in showing that journey of you, and more so, and I think for people, it's a journey of more of your daughter and then your nephew and that whole family connection of that. But one of the things that really stuck out with me in the video, or in the documentary, was a quote that you said: "I trusted my doctor, and I knew he was a good doctor, but you still felt like you were losing it because you knew there was something wrong and nobody could pinpoint it." And isn't that what majority of people with celiac disease go through? Because the average diagnosis is what, 5 to 10 years it takes?
Yeah. And that number keeps changing. Hopefully it's going down, because as you said at the beginning, it's Celiac Awareness Month, and I think there is more awareness, but it is still woefully underdiagnosed, and it shouldn't be that way. And I think, it's to your point about the quote about my doctor, and my wife and I sort of argued about this, which is too many doctors, you know, as we're raising awareness, and I talk about this on my podcast all the time. There are these incredible medical centers in Chicago. We have a number of them. University of Chicago has a renowned celiac department, and we have North Shore Healthcare System in our backyard, and they understand celiac. But there's just too many doctors out there who aren't educated on what celiac looks like, and that, you know, the old belief was it was a childhood condition, and that you had a child that had failure to thrive, a distended belly, that they weren't getting any nutrients. And there are still those cases, but you can now get diagnosed at any age. It doesn't discriminate based on, you know, male or female, and it's in, you know, everybody's, it happens differently in different, you know, ethnicities, but every ethnicity can get celiac disease. It's a genetic condition. And so there's just too many stories. I still keep hearing stories from people that I meet, used to be in person at expos, and people who send me emails that have this list. I went from doctor to doctor. Nobody could tell this was celiac. And I've frankly heard of doctors who refuse to test people, saying, this is the, condition du jour, that this is like, they hear, gluten intolerance or celiac, and they think that too much is being made of it, that it's not. I've heard all sorts of stories. So, it's really frustrating to go through that and feel like you have a good medical team. I don't blame my doctor for not diagnosing me. It was a blind spot for him. And that's why we need something I'd love to do with the Celiac Project, is to work in re-educating, doctors and medical staff of what to look for, because as you and I were talking about before we came on, they think 300 plus symptoms for celiac, and it's not just the distended belly, the failure to thrive. It's so much more. There can be very vague or no symptoms, which is something that you and I talked about, that I talk about in the film with my nephew, having very, very not classic symptoms, but much less symptoms than most people have, but still some symptoms.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people there's a lot of contention, I could say, I guess, about people getting the allergy test, and they're getting tested for intolerance, and or they're going on a gluten-free diet, because Mike got on it at 40 and was diagnosed with celiac, and I have some of the same symptoms. But that's the thing, is like, we see the symptoms of ourselves in other people, and our doctors aren't necessarily seeing that, especially sometimes when you go to the doctor. Oh, well, I haven't had that symptom in a couple of weeks, right? When you go and you're not having those issues anymore. But so I think that's one of the biggest challenges too, is that, we do see our symptoms in other people, and or by talking through them. And so we're like, oh, well, let me see that. And there's a lot of self-diagnosis out there, but I think the doctors still need to believe us. And actually, I was watching some television show, I think it was 911, and the woman's mom went into the emergency room, and she was having all these symptoms, and the doctor just said, oh, you're fine. And then she's going through med school, and she had an aneurysm, and she diagnosed it from a med school student, and she said to the doctor in the ER, he's like, just believe your patients. Believe them when they tell you something's wrong.
Right. And to that point, Tracy, I think people meet me and they go, you're the celiac guy and you hate gluten. And I can't eat gluten. I have a medical condition, and I don't think necessarily that everybody has an issue with gluten. Right. I think it is good, to your point about people might hear my story and think, oh, I think I have that, and go off gluten. And one thing to realize, and we keep hearing that the test is coming, but I don't know if you know this, but if you go off gluten and you're off gluten long enough, the test, the TTG, the test, and the endoscopy that tests for celiac, it's one of those rare conditions that if you're not eating gluten, it's an autoimmune condition, and that what I'm trying to say, the response that your body is having to gluten that is causing the villi to be damaged and causing the blood test to show celiac will go away. So I really do say to people, in fact, my podcast partner, Cam Weiner, he was diagnosed with celiac, and we hear this story a lot too. Doctors kind of diagnose you, send you with a piece of paper, say, go gluten-free and you'll be fine, which is an oversimplification, but they also don't say, get the rest of your family tested. And in solidarity, Cam's family went gluten-free, and they had medical issues that went away. None of them are then willing to go back on gluten, because later they found out you can't get tested for celiac disease. You need to be eating gluten. So it's called the gluten challenge when you've been off gluten. And I just want your viewers and listeners to know that it's another good reminder not just to go gluten-free without the help of a doctor, because you got to get that test. You want to get that test to make sure it's not celiac, because it could just be a gluten intolerance, and that's not going to show up the same way as celiac.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's a really important part, because your body starts to heal and your villi grow back and all of that. And that's a really important thing. So, do make sure that you're eating it when you go to the doctor. And it was it somebody that, I think it was in the documentary, that said that they had stopped eating it and whatever. But Alice Bast was in your video in the documentary, and I heard her speak, and for everybody who doesn't know her, she's the founder of Beyond Celiac, and she started it because she was diagnosed with celiac. But in one of her stories is that she gave a speech to a gastroenterology group, and one of the doctors was standing behind her in line trying to order some food at an airport, and Alice was having such a difficult time communicating her needs to this person. The doctor's like, "Oh my gosh, I diagnose people all the time with celiac and send them on their way, and I don't realize this is what happens to them, or what they have to deal with in society after I just say, hey, go on a gluten-free diet." It's a lot more, like you said, challenging than just saying that.
Exactly. It's it's not just order the burger, take the bun off.
Right.
This whole issue of cross contact is so like, we can get a little bit of gluten, and it's different for all people with celiac. But I've met people who get the smallest amount, and they're down for weeks at a time, because there's things called like refractory celiac that are so can be really dire. So it's really hard. The social side of having celiac, I think, is the hardest part for me, in that for me, it wasn't so hard, giving up. I live in Chicago, land of deep dish pizza and everything. And I feel like it is a golden time where, even when I was diagnosed 12 years ago, there were many less products, many less restaurants that understood it. But I will say, not all gluten-free is created equal. You can go out and a menu can say gluten-free, but you really still have to, like your story about Alice, you have to really make sure that they're dealing with the cross-contact issue. And it can be really hard. I have a lot of people who've seen the documentary, listen to the podcast, and we always, it's Celiac Awareness Month, but we always have to be advocating for ourselves, because it's like you say, we're talking about, like, I know people who work in sort of high pressure work situations where food is a lot of, like, they go to conferences, and you never want to be the squeaky wheel who's like, oh, can I get, I need a special meal, and you have to do this. But we have to get used to doing that, or else when you're at the conference, you go off the rails and things aren't going well. But it can be hard to be that person. It's sometimes, easier to do it with close friends, but I've even had close friends that are like, oh, come on, can't you just eat a little? Or, like, you can tell the eye rolls of people. But I do think it gets easier to help educate people about that, to help talk to restaurant staff, if you get that sort of deer in headlights look, that I really need things cooked a certain way, not just gluten-free food.
Right. Well, and that really brings up a good point about, making sure that we're advocating at all times for it. And even like last week, I went to dinner with my parents and my aunt and uncle who were in town, and we went to a restaurant that's 90% gluten-free. They have dedicated fryers for the fried shrimp. I'm like, I can actually have fried shrimp in this restaurant. And his daughter is celiac. The owner's daughter is celiac. But my aunt was looking at the malt vinegar bottle. She's like, this contains gluten. I'm like, yeah, because malt is from barley. And, there's a lot of intricacies in understanding what it means. So what ways in your eyes, can people be advocates like you and I, whether they're planning an event for your daughter or, planning an event for 500 people, how can we be advocates for our guests that are gluten-free and celiac?
It's a really good question. It's really, as someone who lives with this, has a daughter who lives with this, I think it's nice if you're planning something, to be sort of proactive. My cousin, who I'm very close with, got married recently, and this is a good example of, it was in California. We had to travel there, and this is though the couple's special day. And I've been married before, and I know the last thing you want is a bunch of people reaching out to you saying, oh, I have this food restriction, I have that food restriction, and those are the stickiest, I think, places. So I would say to people who are listening, if you have an event, to be mindful that there are people out there. I think we handled it well. I'm close enough with my cousin that I said, we're not doing this to make more stress on this stressful day for you. We are doing this because, if we can't, if we're not going to be able to be accommodated, then we'll have to get our food before or after, or do something. And they were very helpful, and there was a night where, sure enough, we did have to, the rehearsal dinner, we had to make other plans. But yeah, I think that communication is key. I think whether you're the one putting on the event or you're the one going to the event, finding the most tactful way to talk to the caterer, the people who are putting it on. And I think in living this way for 12 years, I've gotten very good at figuring out, if I was interviewing someone for a party that I was throwing, I would get some references. I would reach out to my community, first of all, to see the caterers and people who are doing this right. I often say this to people, the restaurants that do gluten-free well in my area, they are filling such a service for the people who have celiac and gluten intolerance, that we're very loyal, I think, because the places I go in my area, I'd say there's like a handful of them, and we go back over and over because they go the extra mile. I don't people will tell me this new place popped up, this and I've had some bad experiences by, it's fun to be spontaneous when you're going out with friends.
Right.
But at the same time, my friends know if they want to go out with me, they kind of come to me, can you vet the restaurant? And I think it's certainly, like I was saying before, it's not the position I want to be in. I want to say, yeah, let's just show up and have brunch at this, cool looking new place. But I always make a lot of phone calls before I'm going to a place for the first time, because you just want as few surprises as possible. And again, it sort of knocks down the ability to be more spontaneous, but it keeps you healthy, and I'll take that any day.
Well, yeah, it keeps you healthy, and it keeps you from, and you mentioned it, going to a conference, being down and out. I mean, you could be in your room for 3 days instead of attending the conference that you paid for because of a little crumb or something like that. And so the psychological, social aspects of that can be very hindering, besides the medical aspects.
Exactly.
So you and Cam did a a top 5 list of what needs to be improved and what still needs some work on a couple of episodes ago on the podcast. And it's, more testing or better testing. Why after this many years has testing not been improved? But, what are some of the things that you think have improved since you first got diagnosed, and some things that you still think need some work on?
That is a very good question. So I think, overall, from the time that I was diagnosed, there's much greater general understanding. And to give you some example of that, when I used to go to restaurants 12 years ago, 10 years ago, I would say gluten allergy. Now I can say celiac, because when I said celiac before, you get a lot of these deer in headlights looks. People now, more and more in the restaurant industry, understand that people aren't, just living gluten. There are the people who are eating gluten-free, and I don't. I embrace everybody who's eating gluten-free. I don't, if it's helping you, then I'm all for it. I know a lot of people, like we talked about before, who weren't able to get properly diagnosed because they went gluten-free before getting a test. I know people who've, frankly, been tested and it comes back negative. But I know that there are a lot of people. My wife doesn't have celiac, but she has gluten intolerance. She has Hashimoto's, so she eats gluten-free. I think there's greater awareness. I do still think that we have a long way to go with the medical community. I think something that Cam said, it is mind-boggling, that celiac, they say it affects about 1% of the population.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that so there is no cure for celiac, as we all know. They're working on some medications right now. Cam and I happen to be able to get into a trial in our area, but that's for a treatment that would allow you to deal with the cross-contamination a little better. That's not a cure. So the fact that they still keep moving the target of treatment and hopefully a potential cure, although I am less optimistic that in my lifetime there will be a cure, maybe in my daughter's lifetime. But there are no real treatments besides living a gluten-free life. And the sad thing about this is that we were throwing out some stats, and about 40% of us, I think that number would be higher, but at least 40% of us report that we're still having symptoms, not feeling great on a gluten-free diet. So
wow.
I don't know and that's a really troubling number.
Yeah.
Not, having just this one treatment that is, not perfect, because we're all getting little trace amounts of gluten. It's just a question of how much. So I would really like to, hopefully live in a world where those of us who have celiac disease have a better quality of life. One study that they did said that the emotional and psychological toll of celiac disease is above end stage renal failure. Like that, that
Wow.
living with it is a really stressful thing overall, sort of adding to your level of stress. So everything that I do, I want to demystify celiac, support the community, and hopefully find ways to make it an easier thing to live with.
Okay, so which something you said in there made me think about, when you're going out to a restaurant or you're going to an event, the labeling of it. And I asked you this before we last week or whatever, but there's some places that put gluten friendly on there, and then there's the labeling on packaged foods. But how would you want, I actually want to put this out there. When you go to a restaurant, unless it says certified gluten free, you know that the restaurant is not gluten free, right?
Right.
Right. But you have, what expectations do you have for that restaurant, and how would you, and or event or hotel or convention center? So because you do go to a lot of conventions, what is your expectation of them to share with you or communicate, label their products or the food that they're serving?
The food
At
that they're
the event?
serving.
Yeah.
Right. It's nice. We have a chain of restaurants in Chicago called Let Us Entertain You that have been
Yep.
around for a long
Mhm.
time. And they have shared with me, and I when I was making the documentary, one of the things we didn't end up, we sort of it would have taken things in another direction. We were going to go through a restaurant and show these protocols, and maybe people are asking, and maybe when we do a revisiting of a video, a second, installment, hopefully, of the Celiac Project, I can delve a little more into this. But, knowing, I bring up Lettuce because they have shared their protocols with us, and some of the really nice things that I've heard from the restaurants that I trust and uh, over and over treat me the right way is that they use color coded plates. So when things go in, they put, a gluten alert or something like that, gluten allergy. Even though it's not an allergy, they say that, and I'm fine with that. But then in this particular place, not only are they using color coded plates as it goes through the process in the kitchen, but a manager has to follow it every step of the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they do a really incredible job of taking it so seriously, to the point where there's one of their restaurants that we'd go to a lot, Wildfire. When we get there, they'll see our names in the um, sort of our reservation, and they will bring the gluten-free menus that we don't even have to say it to them. And the first, I'd say, 100 times that I went there, I would say I have a gluten issue, and now they see you with the gluten-free menu, and they even treat the people who are eating gluten-free just purely by choice the same, because they don't want to risk anything. In other words, I've been to places and they're like, I'll get, sort of deeper in the meal, and maybe I'll bring up that I have celiac disease, and they'll say, "Oh, so you really need this?" And then I'm like, "Oh, you're just asking me this now?" And I thought we went through all of that. So these places that really have systems in place to make sure from the time that the wait staff enters it into the computer that that they've alerted and they're following that. That to me is the greatest example of just me. I never worry there. And as I say, going, like, if you're traveling and these kind of things that we all do, there's always going to be a little bit of worry. But I do know, like, if I'm out of town, we just had a wonderful, before the pandemic happened, me and my family went to San Francisco, and this was somewhat unintentional. My cousin lives there. She knows we have to eat this way. We ended up doing a day where we went to 100% gluten-free restaurants throughout the day. And I
Wow.
found myself at the end of the day, it wasn't, as I say, Tracy, it wasn't intentional. My cousin wanted to find safe places, and there's some apps, one's called Find Me Gluten Free. And, there's no better experience than eating out, going to places and knowing you don't even have to ask questions because there's nothing but gluten-free food there. So that would be, I would say, the greatest example of eating out and feeling safe. But that's going to be more rare. But it's nice that there's more and more of these places popping up, because I think they're seeing the value, and they're also seeing, like I said, that a group of their customers are going to be coming there loyally because they know they can turn the stress off and they can just eat like anyone else. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that pops up in that whole thing is the service staff. The staff is trained, not just the culinary team, but the front of the house staff is trained. And I think that's even more valuable, as not more valuable, but that's just as valuable, because I've been saying this forever, but those servers and those hostess or banquet captains are your front facing people to you and I. We're the ones serving you, and they have to be just as informed and knowledgeable about what they're doing and the menu as the chefs do.
That's an excellent point, because even if the kitchen has all these protocols in place, but you get a server who's not educated on this, you're going to feel that stress. And if they look at you and go, gluten, was that, milk? And then you're freaking out, because we've all heard those stories of like them not understanding really what gluten is. And it's a very, very good point that the whole staff needs education, because if the person that's bringing you your food and that you're giving the order to doesn't understand, the weakest link kind of thing happens, and you're not going to feel confident that you're getting safe food.
Exactly. And actually, when I went to dinner with my aunt and uncle, their ticketing, their POS system has, gluten-free pop out in a different color on the ticket, but the expediter or the runner of food noticed that mine was not the gluten-free meal. And she's like, nope, this one's supposed to be gluten-free. And so even the runners, it's was very, satisfying, and it makes you feel safe,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to your point, there's new, it's harder to certify, restaurants obviously than products being like certified gluten-free, but there are programs out there. I think Beyond Celiac and GIG and others have these programs where someone can come in and train your staff, and really show you the ways. So there are ways, if you're a restaurant out there that wants to do this, there are these support systems out there that can help you figure that out.
Yeah. And even Shandy, who owns Certistar, it's a technology that you upload all of your menus to, and then you can actually give that information to you and I to read and find the options that meet our needs. Okay, so one of the questions that I ask everybody is, what are your favorite food and beverage? And I want you to tell everybody, because we're going to have a conversation about that. But do you remember what?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I put like a fillet, like a nice fillet, which I try not to eat too much red meat, but when I'm out at one of these favorite restaurants, and I think I said for a drink, a martini up, vodka martini up. And it's something, I don't know if my father was like a martini guy. This is something you didn't ask for, but my oldest nephews in the documentary is of drinking age. And my father used to have a saying, which is, you drink 10 martinis, the first 9 are like lighter fluid. They're the worst things you ever had. The 10 is like pure gold. And I've found by my own research that is kind of the case. That's how I feel. And you sort of bonded. My father passed away about 3 years ago, but bonded with my nephew over, got him to try martini for the first time, and going through that. So the martini makes me think of my father, my dear father, and he always taught me it's not really about the martini, it's about like what you put in it. So if I go to a place, I try to get all the sorts of olives and onions, and it's like I don't know. That's heaven for me.
No, I love that. I'm not a dirty martini. I don't drink anymore, but I was never dirty martini. I love olive oil, but I cannot do the olives.
Oh, I do, and I don't, let me get that straight. I like the olives in it. I don't like the olive juice. That was
Right.
more, yeah, when I was younger. The dirty martini is not my thing anymore. Just straight up, but with the olives without the juice. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my friend Mark got me one of those. And I'm like, oh no, you can have that. That's all good. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up is I actually was at an event and recently, and they're like, okay, well, we've got a bunch of vegans and we have gluten-free people. So we're serving them all together, the same thing.
Okay.
And so it came out, one of the sandwiches came out, the gluten-free sandwich came out, and it was a tofu, not burger, but just a tofu, a slab of tofu that I think it was a little bit fried. But and I think gluten-free gets plugged into that vegan thing a lot. Does that, I don't know, does that bother you, or are you good with that? Or do you want to have your proteins as a regular protein?
I guess personally, I like my regular proteins. Obviously, having a safe meal is
Most important.
the highest priority. But I will say, so it's funny too. My nephew who has celiac is a lifelong vegetarian. He was raised that way, and he a while back went on like a school trip. It was to the Middle East, and we were kind of pleading with him, like, if you could just eat grilled chicken, like when everybody's out there eating different things, you're gonna do better. And he made it through. He ate a lot of salads. Something that's funny, he's a vegetarian, I am not. A lot of times when we get thrown in together with another group, we both despise mushrooms. Like I have a really bad thing about, like, I don't like to look at them. He also doesn't like them. So oftentimes he if we're at like a wedding or something together, a family event, and he gets, maybe they'll throw him some gluten-free pasta with like mushroom sauce. And that's a time where I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I eat chicken, because that would really bum me out. So to answer your question, I don't love it when we're all grouped together. It is obviously better to have safe food. I will tell you, if I went if I was at a conference or something and they gave me the gluten-free vegan shiitake sandwich, I would eat one of the bars that I brought along with me, and that wouldn't be the worst thing. Because that's another thing I think with celiac or a gluten intolerance, that you learn to become adaptable to situations. I've been in situations where I was told I'd be accommodated, and then I got there, and then my red flags are going off. And as we talked about, Tracy, the last thing I want to do if I'm anywhere is like, take a risk that isn't needed to take. So I will then, go with a plan B, and hopefully those of us with celiac tend to travel with lots of bars that are gluten-free, because I've had to do that as a quick meal replacement. Certainly I've been to different airports that some are better with gluten-free than others, but you can always, find a bar in a pinch. And you don't want to, like, I've had long days of travel where I realize I ate a bag of nuts and a bar and, a glass of water, and that's not ideal. But, we all have to deal with that sometimes.
And then I need to take and I'm right there with you. The Detroit airport's gotten really good with offering gluten-free things. But I do need to take a step back with what I said. The regular proteins. So animal-based, plant-based proteins are regular proteins. Just for the rest of my listeners who may be bashing me because I just bashed vegan proteins, but vegan proteins are very good for you. Plant-based proteins, I should say. So it should be plant-based versus animal-based proteins. Yes.
Correct. I agree with you there. Yes.
So
all good proteins. Yes, and I don't mean to offend people with my dislike of mushrooms.
Right, exactly.
We all have our things.
And I'm not right there with you with mushrooms. So,
okay.
Well, Mike, I so appreciate all of the work that you do. Sharing your life story is so valuable, and I look forward to the next rendition of the documentary, because I think it's just, there is still so much more to learn. But how can people get a hold of you, and or one tip that you can give them to continue to be advocates for you, as well as their family and friends?
Okay. The hub for all things Celiac Project is celiacproject.com.
Okay.
Just celiacproject.com. You can find me also on, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you go, just look up Celiac Project. And if you want to reach out to me personally, I'm available. You can send an email at info@Celiac Project. Will find me. And then anything you just, I just think, it's interesting. Celiac Awareness Month is May, and I feel like it's a pumped up, it's a time I'm doing many more talks like this wonderful one with you. To us at the Celiac Project, every month is Celiac Awareness Month, and I'm open to hearing everyone's stories. I think that's what brought me into this community, is that I'm a storyteller, and so I want to hear anybody's story who wants to share it with me, and just hope by this time next year that the world understands celiac a little better. And just appreciate the platform. Thank you for asking me to be on here, and this has been a lot of fun today.
Likewise. Thank you for all that you do, and I really appreciate it. And you and I need to talk offline to see how we can collaborate some more to help educate more and more people. So thank you.
That would be great. Thank you, Tracy.
Tell your family best of luck and hello.
I will.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. We are here every Wednesday on YouTube, the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group. Please join. It's free to join. And the Thrive Meetings and Events Facebook page. You also can find this podcast on all podcast platforms, and this episode will be downloaded next Tuesday for everyone else to listen to. And, just stay tuned, stay healthy, and eat well. And if you're celiac, do your due diligence. And if you're serving people with celiac disease, make sure that it's gluten-free. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Mike.